So welcome everyone. And I want to welcome Glenn Aparicio Parry to the podcast tonight. And Glenn lives in Albuquerque, which is a place where I have lived and is near and dear to my heart, and is the director of the Center for Original Thinking and has written some books in this area and some interesting papers that we'll talk about tonight, I believe. And I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to say anything more he wants to say about his story and how he got to be here today, and however else he wants to introduce himself. So Glenn, take it away.
Well, thank you, Louis. It's a blessing to be with you, and thank you to the ancestors, and thank you to the elements, the light, air, water, earth. Thank you to everything that has happened to bring us to this moment in time. I think a mutual friend put us together, but I've been aware of your work for some time. When we were doing my previous, for nearly 20 years, I was the director of the SEED Institute, the Source for Educational Empowerment and Community Development, which really morphed into community dialogue, because that's what we did, was dialogue. And we brought together dialogues between Native elders and Western scientists that were moderated by Leroy Littlebear, the Blackfoot elder for the Kainai tribe up at the Blackfoot Confederacy up in Lethbridge, Alberta, Canada. And Leroy had originally brought together dialogues with David Bohm in 1992, which is a significant year, 500 years after Columbus had come essentially to these lands. And for the first time since then, in a lot of ways, there was a respect dialogue between Native elders and mostly quantum physicists. There were some linguists there too, including Dan Moonhawk Alford, who was a buddy of mine and taught at the California Institute of Integral Studies. I took a class from him called Anthropological Linguistics back in 1983 that really brought together the confluence of Native America, consciousness, language. So it was really quite the confluence, a lonely intersection, he would describe it as standing on. By the way, I live in Placitas now. If you know Placitas, it's just a little bit north. My wife and I moved here in September. The address of the Circle for Original Thinking is still in Albuquerque, but we're living amongst the wild horses here. So I couldn't think of anything more beautiful, and the horses spoke to me in dreams. And when I came to visit them, it was just obvious I wanted to be here, living amongst the horses, and that's why we came. And hopefully the water supply will hold out here, because these are the wild horses that you may be familiar with. Some of your listeners or viewers are from all over, but if you are familiar with New Mexico, the pueblo to the north, 6 miles from Placitas, San Felipe Pueblo, has a very deep relationship with the horses, and they were sheltered there for centuries. And then they've sort of migrated down, most of them or some of them, to Placitas. And we do have water here, but not. The water is drying up, so we'll see how long the horses will be here. And really, that's it. I mean, I would say, if you want me to introduce myself, I would generally introduce through the nexus. My father's mother was Basque. from the high Pyrenees of Spain. We got to visit her village when I was 14 years old. It was 1969. My father was an engineer who was working on the Apollo 11 project that had just been completed July 20th, I think today, right? Isn't this interesting? And of 1969. And then a couple weeks later, we were taking a family vacation in Europe, and we went to my grandmother's village in the High Pyrenees, and we drove a Volkswagen Squareback in there, and 60 villagers, which was everybody in the village, came to greet us because we were their relatives. And also, we were the first automobile that ever came into that village. There was an, yeah, it is amazing, especially because now you can stay in a vacation rental at this place. But anyway, you know, they served us a meal. They feasted us with, you know, I think this is why I became later on connected with Navajo people in New Mexico, because they were sheep herders, you know, and they feasted us with lamb, and they also had a rabbit, and they held up the rabbit, and my mother wasn't happy to see, you know, this is what we're going to have for dinner, and they were very healthy. They had no running water. They had no heat other than animals on the first floor. I returned to my seventh grade class, and the teacher, Mr. Fisher, was talking about how the index of poverty or something, if you only make a certain amount of money, if you don't make that much money, you're poor. And I raised my hand and said, no, I don't think so. I don't think money has anything to do with being poor. You can be wealthy without money. Because my relatives in Spain are very wealthy. They eat well. They probably needed some dental work, but they were healthy and wealthy of spirit, and I loved them, and they made a huge impression upon me. Later on, things shifted, but I don't want to go into a whole story, but that's really it. My mother's side of the family is Jewish, so according to the Jewish people, I should be saying that I'm Jewish. But the truth is that my father's side of the family, the Basque and the Aragon Spanish side of the family, were just so much friendlier, and they're more of a family. They're mi familia, and so I cottoned more to that. And my mother's side of the family fell apart after my grandfather died. So, but that's still significant. And my mother was a wonderful social worker who worked in African American communities. I mean, I remember being on a bus with her in Freeport, Long Island, when I was about 12. And the whole bus ride, the kids just sang, "Hey, sardines, hey, and pork and beans." So that was the entire ride. And it was she made a difference. She made a difference in the world. She gave me a lot of my values, so that's probably there. But my life shifted. I'd love to talk with you about what happened at Seed, but I turn it back over to you.
Well, you made me think of one of the papers you wrote on water, which I read in preparation for our discussion. And I thought, you know, it's interesting the way that indigenous thought permeates the world in a sort of subterranean way. That if you look underneath modernism or capitalism or whatever we call it, you can find indigenous thought. And, you know, as you did in the Basque region of Spain, and as you found in Dene land and Placitas, New Mexico,
Mm,
that it's really everywhere. It permeates the world, but it's not necessarily in charge of the world, I think. And I wondered if you could talk more about your thoughts from that paper on water and also how that's emerged, especially now that we're so aware that there's such a lack of water in the Colorado River and the Rio Grande and places like that.
mm, Well, probably the most important thing I've endeavored to do in life is to pray to the elements on a regular basis, to pray to the light, the air, the water, the earth, and to understand that that's what I'm made of. That's what we're all made of, and that's what interconnects us with all other beings as well. And water is alive. I mean, I've been very blessed to have some good mentors in that. I would consider my Hopi friend Vernon Masai Yesfa to be one of those, who runs the Black Mesa Trust, and he held a water conference. Vernon came to our Language of Spirit dialogues that brought together Native elders and Western scientists. He found out about us, and he came to us first. But then he organized a beautiful water conference, and he brought even Masato Emoto from Japan, and the person that became famous, talking about how water has a memory. And in that conference, they shared about how the different waters, the waters above the earth, the waters underneath the earth, the rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans all have a relationship. They all have a relationship with each other. And I'm not sure if he said this during this conference, but when he's in his political, when he's talking about what he had to endure politically with the Peabody Coal Company in that region, he wasn't able to get through to them when they first were. I guess they were approved by some authorities to do their coal slurry project there, and Vernon was trying to explain to them about this relationship between the waters, but they thought that was silly, because they said, we're only going to use a little bit of your groundwater to create the coal slurry. But what the Hopi speak about is the way it really is. There is a relationship between the waters. And since you're a healer, you know this best of all, because if you are in connection with water and praying with water and understanding that your heart is water, and that your heart is like your heart leads to the ventricles, the atrium, the capillaries in your body are like the river, streams, lakes, and oceans, the bodies of the earth. Mother Earth is a being that's alive, and we are interconnected with her that way. So it all works together. And in fact, what happened for the Hopi is that the Peabody Coal Company's oil slurry project almost eliminated the groundwaters, which the Hopi lived on for so long, the aquifers underneath those mesas, which to somebody who's going there for the first time would appear to be in the middle of, far away from any water source. But there's a natural water source that's coming up underneath the earth that supported them, allowed them to do their farming. So Vernon was successful in actually moving out the Peabody Coal Company. It took him years and years and years. So I really have a high regard for people who are both spiritual and political, because it takes enormous perseverance to succeed that way. because business people are not always going to be open to that kind of thinking. In fact, they usually are not.
Right. It's one of the Lakota elders that I know says that calls the root of all evil Homo economicus.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that phrase. I think actually Gregory Bateson came up with it first, but it might have been picked up by your Lakota elder,
Yeah.
Homo economicus. Yes, it's a very sad being if you actually try to live that way. But if you lived economically from the original meaning of economics, like when they used to have home economics classes, if you looked at the original meaning, it's close to home. It's about home. So economics doesn't have to be a bad thing. It has to have some wisdom behind it. You can't just be trying to run things based on numbers. We see what
Right.
happens when that occurs.
And recently I came across some writing by a Lakota person who was exploring indigenous business. And
Uh-huh.
it was very interesting because he came up with this idea that um, good business is one in which everyone wins.
Yeah.
That the goal of business should be for everyone to benefit and no one to lose. And he said this is quite different from contemporary capitalism, which he described also as Homo economicus.
Well, that's very interesting. I've I've started a lot of businesses myself, but I mean, for me, it was always about trying to get something out into the world. I mean, it was never, whatever money might come from it or not was secondary, and I just had to make that work. That's all.
Right, right, right. And I was thinking about, I'm just completing two sun dances. We do two sun dances each summer, one in which we dance, and we being my wife and I and my brother, and one in which we're helpers. And one of the things that you learn in Sundance is the incredible power of water, the first medicine, Mehl-Madrona in Lakota, water of life, because you're thirsting and fasting, and when you finally get that cup or ladle of water, it's so powerful
Yeah.
to just the taste and the feel of water coming into your body is just so incredible. And it's just something that you can never forget and that one celebrates for one's entire life. That taste of water after thirsting, for so long in the Sundance.
I'll be going to a Sundance in a week, so I just thank you for evoking that. I've never sun danced, so I just gone as a supporter. But I think that what you say is important and applicable to a vision quest as well, or any ceremony where you refrain from drinking or eating, sweat lodge or something, and that yeah, that makes it very obvious how incredibly important water is, and yeah, it's good to remind yourself of that. I think every day, it's really important. Thank
Indeed,
you for bringing that up.
indeed, I do a water ceremony every morning where I thank the water and drink the water, upon arising.
Mm.
And I think water is life. Without
Mm.
water, we're dead. And, um, I remember in your essay, you talked about the danger of bottled water.
I did. Well, I that the I remember Larry Littlebird, who was Santo Domingo Laguna Pueblo uh, Indian from our New Mexico. He spoke about when he was young, and Larry's older than me, so he's in his late 70s or early 80s now. And his grandfather told him that someday people would have, they were drinking water like people did for millennia at the source, at a river or whatever. And his grandfather said, someday people are going to have little bottles and they're going to put the water in that. It really is strange in a way and sad. I mean, I'm an optimist, Lewis. And I try to keep things optimistic because I think that it could really harm ourselves to be pessimistic and see a negative outcome. But in the case of water, in my own short lifetime, I have seen such horrific spoiling of water. It is hard to stay optimistic about that. But I don't remember what essay you're referring to, but I probably or could have spoken about, because I often think this, that if you know water is sacred and you are paying attention to the water in your own heart connecting to all the other waters, you wouldn't even consider drilling for oil through water. You would know how dangerous that is, and you just wouldn't do it, and but we have to learn these things anew. When
Right.
you said earlier that indigenous thought is present everywhere, yes, it is, and you could use the word perennial wisdom. I mean, every culture understands the value of water on some level. They at least have had that in their teachings, but they've chosen to push that aside temporarily for financial gain. But I am optimistic they're going to have to come back to it because, as the Cree Indian proverb said, when the last stream is dried up, the last fish has been eaten, you'll know you can't eat money.
Right. Right. Well, and I read a prediction from the MIT Systems Dynamics group that if we don't radically modify our collective behavior, we'll run out of fresh water in 2054.
Well, I have not read such a thing, but I know this, Louis. We have to change our thinking. That's what my life work has been about. If we're going to change what we do, we have to get to the source, and the source is always in our thoughts. And my dog is growling on the rug there. He's just enjoying himself. Sorry, but it distracted me. We have to change our thinking because that's where it's all about. And that's what my first book was about, Original Thinking, which emerged out of the language of spirit dialogues because they were so instrumental in changing my thinking. Those dialogues that the Seed Institute brought together from 1999 to 2011, 13 years of them. And we were following up on dialogues that started in 1992, as I mentioned earlier. So we just carried the torch further. And they were pretty spectacular. They were just spectacular. One of the things I found out at the very beginning of my research on original thinking was that the origin of the very word thinking was thanking. And it's that in English, French, Dutch, Norse, Frisian, German, and Old Anglo-Saxon. Those are the 7 I found. But I bet it's in a lot more. And I thought, how could this be? I found it highly significant. And I thought, the only thing I could come up with really is that originally all our thoughts were prayers. All our thoughts serve to connect us with creation. And that's so different than the way people tend to think today, where their thoughts put them in a little bubble apart from other people. But it doesn't have to be that way. So, we're having a conversation where, even though we're using an internet interface, our energies are meeting, as Rumi said, in the field. We're creating a field of consciousness where this is how thought works. It is social. Actually, you said that in your wonderful book, Coyote Medicine. That was one of the detriments of the idea that thought creates reality in the New Age movement, is that really it's not an individual thought that creates reality as much as it's the field of interaction that creates reality. And that is the beauty of dialogue. That's the beauty of bringing together 20 to 24 people in sacred ceremony, because dialogue is a ceremony, and we would do a sweat lodge before it. We would say prayers. It's really a way to, especially under the expert moderation of Leroy Little Bear, it was a way to invite spirit into the room, and spirit would move through the room. And some people there could see it, like Joseph Rael, who's, a seer, or beautiful painted arrow. And he would see the swirling energy moving through the room. I'm not able to see it, but I was able to feel it. And I was able to observe that when one person is opening their mouth and speaking the same thoughts that are supposedly in my head, because thoughts really they're not in one person's head, they're in the field. They would say that, and I would see how we were creating a spell where that's something you mentioned in your book, Coyote Medicine, that it's very much like that. We're creating a rapport, a spell, an interweaving of consciousness. And that's why I love dialogue so much.
And since we're in the Sundance season, it's really what happens in the Sundance is this: we create this vortex of power, of prayer, of love and compassion, and somehow it gets transmitted through the tree to the sky and back to us on the ground, completing a circle, I think. And I think of on the 4th day, we have the healing round where the community processes into the tree. And it's at that time that the tree releases the healing energy into the people that we've built up for 4 days. And finally, it comes into those people who are walking by, and it does what it does. One never knows what it does, but it does what it does. And I was thinking about, in Lakota, there's a word chekiayo, which is usually translated as prayer, but an elder recently told me that a better translation was to have an intimate conversation with your relatives.
Intimate conversation with
your relatives.
your relatives.
Yeah,
Wow, I like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I, to the best of my understanding, that's the most important thing human beings have to do now is to remember that we're related to everything. And obviously, indigenous people are holding this wisdom, um, and it's Western and other peoples that have gone on a little bit different path, but they were on the same path once, not as long ago as people realized either, and it's very possible for them to come back on another path, just like it. Have you been to Prophecy Rock in on the Hopi land?
No, I haven't actually.
Oh well, there's two. Prophecy Rock is there's this one line that which is at where Masao, the original human, was just a very simple person with his planting stick and his seeds, and that path goes forward and actually bends all the way around the rock. There's another path that is going parallel to it, and it's shorter. It ends. So I'm oversimplifying, but the prophecy is if the people are on the wrong path, they're going to come to an end. But there is a place, presumably ahead, where they have an opportunity to come back to the original path. And
I'm happy that you're an optimist because I'm a little more pessimistic.
you are?
Yeah, I'm not sure that humanity will survive.
Well, Mother Earth will survive.
Absolutely. Mother Earth will be fine.
Yeah, and
She doesn't need us.
well, I mean, it would miss. We have some beautiful songs. We do some beautiful things. In fact, in the New York Times, I was just, believe it or not, reading just a couple of days ago. I think it was that in what they're calling now what is it, the anthropause, the COVID,
yeah,
not the Anthropocene, the anthropause of COVID in the 2-3 years in which, especially the beginning, it's kind of over now, unfortunately. But in the first year of COVID, you had such a cessation of human activity that the Earth, Mother Earth, began to recover in a lot of ways. But the writer of the article was pointing out that in a few instances, the departure of humans hurt the ecology. so there are places and times where we've actually helped. I mean, we're just so active. I mean, but I think it's important to see humans as part of everything, and not, I'm very, I do not endorse or even want to enter into a conversation about whether humans cause climate change. Of course we cause climate change. So does everything else. We are the climate. We are the light. We are the air. We are the water. We are the earth. We are breathing out. We and other mammals are participating in the greatest conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory, but the greatest literal conspiracy, breathing together between the trees and the plankton, the algae, and mammals. We're gifting them our breath of carbon dioxide, and they're giving us back oxygen. What a beautiful thing that is. And the more that we realize that, the more love we'll feel, because it's just so amazingly beautiful.
Yeah, I hope we can get there. I'm not so sure, but I'm pleased with your optimism.
Well, you know, I try to be. I'll describe myself as an optimist, but sometimes I think I'm being just a realist. But everybody I ever have met thinks they're a realist, so that doesn't really matter too much. Uh, they just have their own version of what is real,
Yeah.
and you tend to get back what you've put in. So if you think that the world is a violent place and you have to prepare for it by storing a bunch of weaponry or nuclear weapons or something like that, I mean, then that's what you're going to get back. And There has to be a shift in the way we think. So the only thing that I can do, and the only thing anybody can do, is to water the seeds you want to see grow in the world, right? So
Right.
and not just water, maybe give them light and soil and air.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we're all working in that direction. I think I think we're all trying to bring indigenous wisdom, which is not entirely located in indigenous thought, but there's also systems thinking and holistic thinking and other contemporary traditions that understand that we're all connected and interrelated. And I think we're all trying to bring that awareness to contemporary culture. And you know, we do what we can.
Well, well, Lewis, thank you for the work you've done in the world. I mean, um, what you've done in bringing to life a different way of looking at medicine and psychology is super important. And I know that your path has not always been an easy one, and a lot of people's aren't. My buddy Dan Moonhawk Alford, who is really my mentor into Native American, the person that most responsible for the language of spirit dialogues that meant so much of my life coming into being. Because he was at the original dialogue, and he and I cooked up the idea to bring it to Albuquerque. Um, he's he always he was a bit of an optimist. I mean, he looked at all experience, all people. He said that you can learn from everybody, even if the only thing you learn is what is a bad example. You could, and I think we can get there, Lewis, because sometimes there's been some shift in consciousness that we don't even see, because if we get too entangled in the politics of the moment, it's hard to see what's happening underneath. Does that make sense?
It does indeed. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we are on an arc here. I'm going to throw out an idea to you that you would think is probably quite unusual. So I'm going to throw out this idea. I think we're on this giant arc where we were originally completely one with Mother Earth. We were completely one with Mother Earth. And we went through a process where we basically separated, as the ancient Greeks spoke about, the separation of the sexes. We separate into our own physical bodies. That was what was spoken about, supposedly as just a fable, just a story. But I think it might be true because there's something very appealing to me about it, and it's something about, so when we turn in our own physical, when we separated into male and female, the urge to unite was overpowering. But the ancient stories actually talked about that some of the separations, that we were originally double sex beings in a single body, but it wasn't always male and female. Sometimes it was male male and female female. So those individuals that separated had a yearning to reconnect with their other half, and it might be the same sex. So that's been kind of the path for a long time. And as we did this separation, we forgot about how we're interconnected with Mother Earth. But what I see happening now, and I don't understand everything about it, certainly, but with gender fluidity and what have you that's coming forward now, I think we're actually are going through a process in the biggest picture where we are going to disidentify with our physical bodies as much as we have been and start to re-identify with Mother Earth. So that's the eventual arc that we're on. Now, I suppose you might say, how can we even survive that long? Because we're just, and there's lots of evidence to show how we're, making the earth less hospitable. But I think there is the emergence of these new, and it's not easy to understand because I've been programmed myself, the male and female, but these days I meet all kinds of people who are just in the, they're not that anymore. They're gender fluid. And I think that if we go back to Native America, there was more acceptance of unusual sexuality and way, certainly of twin spirited people a long time ago. So again, maybe, and I don't know, I never talked to a Native person about this, so what's your take? But this may be part of the way that we're destined to reconnect with Mother Earth. We've got to get out of our identification with our physical body and even our physical gender, possibly.
Yeah, and I think so much of gender is a social construction.
Yeah, totally.
For the first time ever in my second Sundance, where I'm a helper, we let a woman eagle dance, which means that she stayed tied to the tree and slept out in the arbor for the whole time. And that was a first. And I said to her, there's an old Lakota saying that a famous chief said, he said, when the women lead the men into battle, they fight harder. And so I said, you're a woman leading the men into battle. And yeah, and I think it's time to move beyond these Christian ways of thinking about gender and to reclaim, the indigenous fluidity that I think always existed. I'm reminded of a famous woman war chief who had 4 husbands. And, it's just time to let go of these rigid Christian, or I shouldn't just, Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Middle Eastern ways of thinking about gender, and to let the North American paradigms reemerge, from that dominance of the Middle East.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the greatest ironies, I wrote a book, Original Politics, which you may or may not be aware of. That's I've written 2 books, one called Original Thinking, one called Original Politics, and I'm now writing a book called Original Love. And in the book of Original Politics is a lot about how Native America influenced the founding fathers of the political nation. And really, I mean, I contend that that was their by far their biggest influence, and it makes sense. I mean, the founding fathers themselves often quoted ancient Greek democracies or something, but I'm not quite buying that, because they were here on this land for, colonizers were here for about 150 years before the United States was founded as a nation. And they were confronted with a completely different way of being in the world, and one that was radically inclusive. So that's what we're talking about. It's a radical, it's an inclusive, egalitarian way of being in the world that was open to difference. This is living democracies, and for those colonizers that were open-minded, they found that extremely appealing, because they were coming from the land of kings and queens, and they were subjects in a colonial experiment, and here they found people that were very open-minded, not just toward sexuality, but they had completely egalitarian societies, completely open. And that's the paradox of the United States, because it's founded with these beautiful flowery words, about all men are created equal. It says all men, but and that was at the time, the same time that the founding fathers were only giving the vote to white male property owners. So it's there's this paradox here, where, but I think a seed was planted. A seed is planted, and it's hard to imagine now, because we're in a very transitional time in the United States, where the country seems to be completely falling apart. But that's all part of the process of eventually realizing a more inclusive society. And it's all the credit goes to Native America for inspiring that, and ultimately the credit goes to the land, because where did Native Americans get their vision? They got it from the land.
Right.
That makes sense? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed. And yes, I do want to acknowledge your book's original politics and original thinking, which I have read and enjoyed very much.
Oh.
I'm looking forward to Original Love.
Oh, thank you. Well, again, I don't know what your timing is, but I'd love to tell you the story of Original Love, how it came about.
Well, we've got a few more minutes. So
Okay, because I have no say in the matter, none. My wife Tomoko, one morning pronounced the sentence. She just said, "You are going to write a book called Original Love," and she's never said anything like that since, and she had never said anything like that before. She had never predicted my future of any kind, but some spirit moved her to say that you're going to write a book called Original Love. And then a year later, I did do one thing when she said that. I opened up my computer and I started a folder called Original Love, but I didn't do anything else about it. And then a year later, I was in Taos, New Mexico. I was speaking to a woman named Jean Ellis Sankari, and she taught at UNM Taos, University of New Mexico, Taos. And she wanted me to teach there. And she was speaking to me, and she interrupted herself in the middle of a sentence, and she said, "I just got a download." That's kind of how Taoseños speak. "I just got a download. You are going to write a book called Original Love, and it will be the third book in a 3-part series with original in the title." And at that time, I had started a book called Original Politics, but I had changed the title to Sacred Politics. even though the computer folder still said original. But anyway, it was made an impression on me. I said, wow, okay, now I've got two confirmations from the universe here. And so I changed the title of Sacred Politics back to its original title, which was Original Politics. And then the book flowed better and it coordinated with the first book. And then I went to sleep a couple of days later and got my own download, if you want to use that word, for how to write original love. And it's really about, it's kind of what we were speaking about a lot today, but it's more about remembering your radical interconnection with everything on the earth. That's a love that gets me most excited. I mean, romantic love is a part of that, but it's just a part of it. Yeah, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. And from in Algonquin languages, it's Guadalupe, which is a non-romantic but very deep love. And in Lakota, it's tequila or tequilapi, which is that same sort of agape love that we have for everyone. And that seems so important. And I did read one of your chapters from Original Love, which was Fear, Hope, and Love in COVID times.
Oh, it's not necessarily a chapter from Original Love, but it is inspired a little bit. There's pieces of it in there. Yeah. So you have some idea. Thank you.
Yeah. And I loved your writing about grandfather Leon Secatero.
Oh.
And I wondered if you could just talk a little more about him, because he sounds so amazing.
Well, of any person that I have met, he was the sweetest soul I've ever met, and he had the softest, most mellifluous voice. At the first when we organized the Language of Spirit dialogues, they went on for 13 years, but Leon was there from the very beginning. He spoke so soft that in that very first dialogue, he was speaking, and we had a microphone, I guess, but he was speaking, and somebody in the back, a woman in the back. I was going to say a white woman, but okay, so I've said it now. So a white woman in the back said, "Could you speak a little louder?" And then instantly, Rose van Tatter-Braun, a native woman, said, "Could you move a little closer?" Which was the perfect response, because you don't tell an elder to speak louder, you just move closer, and in fairness to the people who came in attendance, there was a learning curve, and they learned over time. But Leon was the sweetest person. He was very loving. He was the most patient person I've ever met. His own children said that he never got angry at them. Can you imagine having a father who never got angry at you? It's pretty astounding, right? And he made a huge impression on my life. And I had the dubious distinction of I set up an interview with Harlan Macasato, who used to do Native America Calling. He did for about 13 years. And on about September 25th of 2008, I set up an interview. Harlan asked me to, do you know somebody who can speak about death from a Native perspective? And I recommended Leon and Leroy Little Bear. So they both were on this show. and also a scientist who was doing some project scientifically about what happens in the process when you die. And Harlan was like that, as you probably know. I mean, he liked to bring in all points of view, and I think he was really brilliant that way. And Leon was on that show, and it turned out that he died 3 days later.
Wow.
He died on September 28th of 2008, and every year there are sacred ceremonies done from October 1st or October 4th at the Holy Grounds, and it's really about reconnecting with the ancestors there. So Leon chose that his spirit, or I don't know that Leon makes it sound egoic, but his spirit chose that time to die so that everybody was already coming. They were already coming from all over the country. They would come to these ceremonies, and because Leon had expanded it beyond the Navajo, which is why I was able to go, obviously. So it was that became his memorial that year. But he spoke so beautifully because he had gone to the other side. He had a massive stroke when he was in Toronto at a conference or something. I think it was Toronto, but in Canada someplace. And so he had already met with the elders, and he had this wisdom. And I'll just share this one thing, but basically for Leon, life, the living life force, unfolded in a sunwise direction. But when you were dying, you went back in another direction. And it kind of meant to me that there is no such thing as death. We just call it that, really. So it's a reorganization of life force that happens, and we go into the opposite direction. And we, you know, I personally think we do reemerge again, but it's not really that important for this conversation. But certainly he's never left. As far as his family is, they still go to the tree that he was born under. I've been to that tree, and they communicate with him there. His spirit's still here, and
Right.
it's still there for me. In fact, right behind me is all the ancestors, and here's Leon. He's always behind me.
Very good.
And there's I'm a bit of an ancestor worshiper because their energy's never gone.
That's so true.
Mm.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the conclusion of tonight, and it's been a wonderful conversation. Are there any final thoughts you want to share with people before we wrap it up?
Well, I mean, I would actually, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask you a question. So, what is your vision now for the medical world, and how do you see that? Is that world starting to come around to your unique perspective? Is that portal opening, or is it just still closed to people being open to a sacred way of healing?
In general, I think it's
Yeah.
closed,
Mm-hmm.
but in particular, students and residents contact me and want to come learn. And so I think there's a subterranean movement afloat that is important and may or may not eventually have the power to transform the system. But the system is strong because it's entrenched in capitalism, and it's incredibly profitable for the people who run it.
Right.
And, and so I think we just keep nibbling away at the edges. That we live in the margins, of medicine, and we just keep poking at it. You know, like good coyotes, we keep howling at the edges of the world of medicine and reminding them that we're here, to their dismay. And I don't know what will happen, but I keep at it, and I keep training medical students and residents and showing them what I do. And I'm privileged to do what I do because I work for Wabanaki Public Health and Wellness, which serves the 5 tribes of Maine. And so I get to work with people without concern for whether or not they can pay. And that's really special and wonderful and awesome. And, you know, we're really pushing Indigenous ways of healing, of which I think the most powerful is relationship, non-hierarchical, respectful, compassionate, loving relationship. I think that's number one Indigenous healing technique.
Yeah, because you understand that a person is not encased within their body. They're healthy because of their relationships,
Mhm.
and that's yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
very true. That's very
Mhm.
true. Well, it's a blessing to be in conversation with you, and may your work be blessed in the world, uh, and more people find that pathway of healing. I'm putting down a little cornmeal as a prayer for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And may your work continue to blossom as well.
Thank you.
So
Thank you,
thank you
guys.
for being on the program.